It's a beautiful Saturday in South Philadelphia. Good morning, Eagles fans, and welcome to our continuing coverage of 2021 training camp on our live stream presented by DraftKings. I'm Chris McPherson, filling in for the insider Dave Spadera, who is on the ground in Canton, Ohio, as tonight Harold Carmichael, the most decorated wide receiver in Eagles history, will be enshrined into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The ceremony begins at 6:30 p.m. on NFL Network, and he'll be the first to speak, so don't miss it. Now joining alongside me today, as always, is the host of the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast and the producer of the Eagles Game Plan Show. That's right, Fran Duffy.
C-Mac, it's great to be with you here today. Obviously missing Dave. He's going to be doing great work covering Howard Carmichael's Hall of Fame enshrinement. But excited to be here, breaking down another day of practice.
Certainly the ninth day here for the Eagles on the field. It'll be interesting because as we look at quarterback Jalen Hurts stretching, this will now be the second time the offense is going through the plays. The last practice on Thursday was the last installation day, according to head coach Nick Sirianni. Fran, what do you want to see from the quarterback now as we're cycling through these plays for a second time?
Well, you just want to see additional comfort. You want to see, and I think we've seen that, the improvement over the course of day 1 to day 8 in training camp. I thought you saw a lot better play, both from Jalen Hurts and from this guy, number 7, Joe Flacco. Both quarterbacks I thought got better. You throw in Nick Mullins as well, but I think ultimately when you look at the quarterback position, it comes down to comfort, and that leads to execution. That's what you want to see these guys as they're now going through round 2 of this playbook and the installation.
That was a beautiful pass by Flacco on Thursday as he was rolling to his right and he threw a dart down the seam for wide receiver Greg Ward. Truly beautiful to see and brings that experience to the quarterback position room, but also still has that live arm, which will help move the offense down the field. And speaking of down the field, you see Jalen Hurts with that 9 completions of 30 yards or more in the last 5 games of the 2020 season, tied for the most of any quarterback in the NFL. Now, speaking of the men trying to stop him, how about Avonte Maddox, number 29, forced a fumble in Thursday's practice, really livened up the energy on the defensive sideline. Defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon's unit has had no problem bringing the juice early on in training camp.
No, and it's been a lot of fun to be able to watch that guy or these guys fly around. Avonte Maddox, one of those guys that's going to compete through the echo of the whistle on each and every rep. You and I and Ben Fennell, we've been talking about this on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast each and every day here during training camp. Is just the point of emphasis on getting the football on the ground, creating those turnovers defensively, and they're going through it in individual drills and obviously in team periods. But that wasn't a live period necessarily, C-Mac, but it was a very competitive session. And so for Avonte Maddox to force that fumble, get the turnover for the defense, everybody was fired up. It was early on, and you got the sense of what the energy was going to be like throughout the rest of the day.
All right, so we're looking at the rookie 4th-round pick out of Texas Tech. He does spell his last name wrong, in my opinion, but Zach McPherson having an outstanding start to training camp, working primarily with the 3rd-team unit, but he's making plays day in and day out. And while, Fran, he is at times getting beat, he has been in tremendous coverage in phase with the receivers. So it's the types of plays that you want to see. How does the young cornerback bounce back? It seems like time after time again, he's always been in the right position. Strong start to camp there for number 27.
Yeah, Zach McPherson, I think when you look at the cornerback spot, especially in today's game, in today's NFL and in college football, you're going to give up plays, but then it's all about how you respond to that. And every single day, he has gotten his hands on the football, whether it's been interceptions, pass breakups. He's not afraid to get his face, stick his face into the fire there in terms of coming up and tackling guys in the flat. So he's really shown up. He's played with good energy. He's participating well in special teams as well, doing all the little things right, it seems. I'm excited to continue watching him develop, but they don't need to rush to get him in with the starting unit because obviously you have Darius Slay and Steven Nelson has had a good camp as well. You look at it, we talked about Avonte Maddox earlier, so no rush there with Zach McPherson. You don't need to necessarily go nuts with the praise, but he's been around the football every day, has not looked out of place whatsoever.
We're looking at number 50, Eric Wilson, stretching there, leading the linebacker group. And some roster news this morning, Alex Singleton, the team's leading tackler in 2020, also led the team in special team snaps. He's been activated off the reserve COVID-19 list, and that's huge for this linebacking core that has lost Davion Taylor and Jacoby Stevens to injuries early on here in training camp.
Yeah, and my guess is what we'll see from Alex Singleton. Now, there's, I guess, two ways to look at it. Will they just kind of throw him in and he'll be in the rotation, just like everybody has been rotated with the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s at that linebacker spot? Or do you say, hey, look, he's going to be a week behind everybody else. Let's get him as many reps as possible. Keep him in there with the first unit so that he's getting as many of those physical reps. He's been on the sideline for the last couple of days. You know, obviously, that he's been grinding. He's been watching film. So the mental reps are there. But do we want to just get as many physical reps on film as possible? I'll be interested to see what the strategy is there. But the rotation at linebacker, hard to ignore through the first week of camp.
So Jonathan Gannon does not want the linebackers to get comfortable. Yep. And it will be very interesting not to just only where does Singleton fit into the mix with this linebacker group, but overall, where do the guys fit on the depth chart? Because he said that the coaches on the defensive side evaluate after these 4 practice stretches. So if they're going to make any adjustments to the depth chart, they kind of look at those 4 practices as a whole. So something that when you're listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast later on this afternoon or reading our practice notes, and shame on you if you haven't, okay, you'll definitely see exactly how that's fit in there. So we're looking at Greg Ward and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, as well as Adrian Killins, who has primarily worked with the wide receivers here in this camp. It's interesting watching these 3 guys because they each bring something different to the table, not just from a body type standpoint, but also from a skill set standpoint to the receiver group.
Yeah, and as we see head coach Nick Sirianni, we see Jonathan Gannon there as well. I think when you're talking about this coaching staff, and I believe that's Kevin Patullo there, when you're looking at this coaching staff, you talk about the receiver position, all the different body types and skill sets. They're all going to be focusing, okay, if this guy has a unique skill set, if he has a strength here, how do we best pull those strengths out of him and put them on display in our scheme? And I think that's one of the things I've really loved hearing, both from Coach Nick Sirianni and from Jonathan Gannon on both sides of the football. They've talked about that. You know, they talked about the versatility some guys have. Hey, you have a young guy like Milton Williams who has that ability to line up inside and outside. He's got that quick first step. How do we bring that to light? How do we really make that work for our defensive system? You have Travis Fulgham. He's got size, or Jalen Reagor and his speed. How do we have that ability to use those traits to our advantage at the wide receiver, in this wide receiver room and in the offense in general? I think that's a great sign for the team overall.
Speaking of signs, what does it mean, as we saw Nick Sirianni there a moment ago, rocking another player-centric T-shirt, okay? Going back to the spring, it was Brandon Graham, Jason Kelsey. We saw Jake Elliott last week. How about number 26, Boobie Miles? Miles Sanders in his 3rd year out of Penn State. Does this mean we should be taking him first round of fantasy drafts? I mean, is he going to be incorporating him that much more into the offense? What are your thoughts, Fran, of number 26's camp so far?
Yeah, I think when you look at the way Miles has participated so far, he's running hard, he's running confident, he looks decisive out there. The offensive line has done some really good things in terms of getting pushed off the line of scrimmage and creating some room for him. He's still fighting the ball a little bit in terms of pass catching, but far fewer drops so far in practice than what we saw during the season last year. So you like the improvement there. I'm excited to continue watching, and we've talked about it every single day. The running backs in the pass game, the usage in the pass game, that I think will be much more productive in that phase here in 2021.
Well, this coaching staff, largely coming from Indianapolis, knows how to get the running backs involved in the pass game. Last season, the Colts running backs amassed the 2nd most receiving yards, only to New Orleans. And obviously we know how good the Saints pass game working with the running backs has been in recent years. So obviously with Sanders, 78 catches in his first 2 seasons, and I thought he was much better as a running back getting those tough yards last season, but it kind of got lost in the shade of what happened at the end of last season. But I thought Sanders did a much better job throughout the course of the season getting downhill and getting those tough yards when needed, Fran.
Particularly down the stretch. Like the last 4, 5, 6 games, I thought that he ran better than we had ever seen him at the NFL level. So I'm excited to see if he can continue building off that. Obviously, we saw those big runs early on, the ones against Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Those are all well and good. Those count, obviously. But you're not going to count on the 3rd and 8, 83-yard touchdown on a draw play. That's not something that you say, oh, you really want to hang our hat on. You want him to be your primary ball carrier, your foundational organization back. You need to be a grinder. You need to be the guy that is going to pick up, stick his head down and get 5 yards on 1st and 10. You want to be able to see that more often. And I thought down the stretch last year, we saw that from Miles Sanders, which is a good sign.
And it's great that they brought back Jeff Stoutland, run game coordinator previously, keeps that title here with the new coaching staff. So he knows what Miles Sanders' strengths are. He obviously knows how to utilize this offensive line, so it's going to be great to see them marry it together as we check out some of the special teams drills. Early Saturday morning practice at the NovaCare Complex. You are watching our live coverage of 2021 training camp here on our exclusive live stream presented by DraftKings. So again, this evening, Harold Carmichael going into the Hall of Fame, 6:30 p.m. on NFL Network. Just some notes about Harold, who was a 7th round pick back in 1971 out of Southern. Funny story with him going to Southern. He actually followed, first of all, he comes from Raines High School in Jacksonville, which produced, do you know who else came out of Raines?
Brian Dawkins and Lito Shepherd.
And Lito Shepherd, yes. So he went from Raines, followed a high school teammate to Southern, okay. Wasn't on the initial boarding list. They didn't have his name down as someone who was supposed to be on campus, part of the football team, but 6'8", you think you're going to stand out a little bit.
You would think so.
So makes his way, has a career at Southern that earns him a spot in the Black College Hall of Fame, was inducted there a couple of years ago, selected by the Eagles in the 7th round, and everyone thought that when they saw the height on him, 6'8", that it was a typo. You're like, you just drafted a wide receiver who's 6'8", but took him a little while to develop. His 3rd year, he became a starter and a breakout sensation for the Eagles, and just had a tremendous career. All-decade selection in the 1970s, was the Man of the Year in 1980. That was the Walter Payton Man of the Year award previously, before it was named posthumously after Sweetness himself. Obviously got the Eagles to the Super Bowl there in the 1980 season, huge part of that. But when he retired, was 6th all-time on the NFL list in receptions. And to this day, Fran still holds the Eagles records for receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, even though his last snap as an Eagle came all the way back in 1983.
I mean, obviously one of the best players certainly in franchise history and now in NFL history, now going into the Hall of Fame, getting the recognition that Harold deserves. And I think all of this also goes without saying, he's one of the best people you'll ever come across.
Easily,
I mean,
yes.
when I first started here in 2011, one of the first guys that you would see in the building and be like, wow, that's Harold Carmichael. And you would see him and you walk past him and he would just treat as regular a human being as you can come across, and as nice a guy. So happy for Harold Carmichael. I mentioned, I think last week here on this live stream, one of my early memories from starting here, in training camp, back in Lehigh, every single morning, it would be right around this time, he'd come out and there would be a group of fans over to the side and say, "Good morning, Harold." He said, "Good morning, everybody." And he'd go over, shake hands, sign autographs, sign footballs, take pictures, kiss babies, everything along those lines. And he's just one of the most gracious people you ever come across. So I'm really, really happy for him, excited to watch tonight.
Because he worked in the organization for 30 years, around 30 years after his playing career ended. And during the time at practice, he'd be fetching balls. I don't think a person has caught more footballs in the history of the world than Harold Carmichael, okay? But the training camp stories at Lehigh, greeting the fans each and every morning, quite honestly, last year before the pandemic, I think it was my favorite post-Super Bowl moment when he was told that he was going to be a part of the Centennial class. And they brought him to the NovaCare Complex, and Howard Roseman and Don Smolenski were waiting for him at the door, and I think Harold was like, "What's going on here? This is what do they got in store?" And he walks into the building, and the whole organization, 200 some odd members from front office staff, football operations, just everyone in the building lined up the lobby to wish him congratulations, give him a standing ovation. That just shows what he's meant to not just the football side, but just to the entire organization. Just a class act. He's waited his turn. I can't wait for him to go in tonight.
That morning, when the vote was announced and it was announced that he was going to get in, I was down at the Shrine Bowl down in Tampa Bay, down in St. Petersburg, Florida, and former Eagles cornerback Bobby Taylor was an assistant coach on one of the teams down there. And so I saw my phone, he got in. I poked my head over to Bobby Taylor, and he had this huge smile on his face. He knew before I knew. And obviously, he's in tighter circles than I am, and he was just so. I think that just speaks to the impact that Harold Carmichael has on everybody in the organization.
But generations, because you talk about Bobby Taylor and the great teams of the early 2000s, and if you're following our coverage on our social media channels the last 24 hours, players like Zach Ertz and Fletcher Cox all sending their well wishes. Brandon Graham, I mean, that, respect is carried on. The players know just how important he's been to not just the Eagles organization, but to the game of football as a whole. And again, long time coming, way overdue, but glad to see number 17 get his shine tonight. So again, we're going back to the action on the field. Lavert Hill there, second-year player, as we're going through the special teams drills. Following practice later this morning, early afternoon, probably around noontime or so, you'll be able to see Michael Clay, the new special teams coordinator, meet the media. We will carry that live here on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles app, and all of our social media channels. You will not want to miss that. But Fran, this is also a huge weekend because not just obviously practice kicking up again. We've got the first preseason game in our sights coming Thursday, but tomorrow, look, I'm happy if you've been reading all of our notes and listening to the podcast and watching the daily practice live streams, but come watch this team for yourself, okay? Sunday evening, 7 p.m., weather expected to be gorgeous here in South Philadelphia. The first public practice at Lincoln Financial Field. Tickets are still available, only $10, and it benefits the Eagles Autism Foundation. And again, great atmosphere, great seats. I know Coach Sirianni is going to want to put on a show, as this is the real first public display of his football team, so you will not want to miss that here tomorrow in South Philadelphia. Right there, you can see Lincoln Financial Field off in the distance there as the team huddles up, as they're going to likely break into individual drills following that, and we're going to be able to have our cameras on the ground to be able to follow the different drills as they shake out here. So again, really, really great to see this team here on the field today, but going to be so much fun having the fans back in the building at Lincoln Financial Field on Sunday evening.
I'm excited for the very first big play through the air. You hear the roar of the crowd. I'm excited for that. It's going to be great. We missed that last year, certainly, and I'm so excited to have that feeling once again over at Lincoln Financial Field.
We should be trying to go on DraftKings and see if they'll allow us to take bets on who will make that play.
That's a good question.
Coming up here. So as you're watching now, it is the receivers and tight ends. Ball security drills, a huge point of emphasis for this team. It's all about coaching those details, trying to make sure that they take care of the ball on offense. You see the clasp hand method that the coaches have been preaching here, trying to make sure they secure that football. And then on defense, Jonathan Gannon with the Eagle Claw trying to strip the ball away. So it's just a cat and mouse game of trying to see who could do it better. But constantly you see the coaches with either the bats there, the padded bats. Jamal Singleton, the new running backs coach, will have the boxing glove out there. I think these running backs and skill position players are getting a little tired of having the ball punched at them constantly. In fact, Elijah Holyfield was getting frustrated because all the defenders kept coming up to try to punch the ball out. And I was thinking to myself, of all the players on this roster, the last guy.
Yeah, I don't think I'm messing with Elijah Holyfield.
No, not from a boxing standpoint whatsoever. So most of the action here taking place on field one early on. Now we're going to go into the quarterback individual portion here. Looks like we're going to get to see some routes on air.
Potentially, yeah. It looks like these guys probably working on some handoffs, potentially. Yep, we'll work on some of the run plays we'll see here today during practice.
So there we go. Now we're going to switch over to the offensive line. Jason Kelsey, the man in the middle of the all. The word says all, trust from Coach Jeff Stoutland. Players so enthusiastically happy that he's back with the team this season, as he was held over as part of the previous coaching staff there. So great to see him get the work. It'll be very interesting to see this offensive line once it all comes together. Obviously, 14 different line combinations in 2020. It's great to see, though, the anchors, guys like Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson going through, Brandon Brooks working his way back from the hamstring injury. Seo Malo has the hamstring injury as well. But also that left tackle battle, as we're all watching, between Andre Dillard and Jordan Mailata.
Yeah, as we've talked about every single day over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, I've been watching these offensive linemen and defensive linemen work every single day. It's always one of my favorite position groups to study, one of my favorite position battles to watch during camp, and it has lived up to it. It's been a lot of fun watching these guys work. It's been great matchups every single day. The Eagles have a ton of talent, a lot of youth, and guys that are battle tested. Obviously, when you have all the injuries injuries you had a year ago, a lot of young guys saw playing time. So the competition is going to be fierce, not just for the starting left tackle job, but also for those back end of the roster spots. A lot of players, they've got the resume to say, yeah, I deserve to be on this 53-man roster.
Yeah, very, very tough decisions coming up. And that's why this is an exciting time for this football team. Again, with the public practice taking place tomorrow, the first preseason game, and in not one, but 2 series of joint practices going on with the Patriots and then the Jets will definitely provide more information for this personnel staff to be able to make these tough decisions, as they'll eventually have to get down to the 53-player limit. But along the way, there's going to be gradual cuts this season. Pretty much after every preseason game, they're going to whittle it down just a little bit. So critical time for these players who are on that roster bubble, trying to fight for their jobs here on this roster to try to find a way onto the roster and really just keep surviving on a week-to-week basis.
The saying, it's the more you can do, right? And that applies at every single position, offense and defense. In your room, if you are a wide receiver, looking at the wide receivers, can you be an X? Can you be a Z? Can you be a slot? Can you block? Can you be a screen weapon? Can you play on special teams as a coverage player? Are you a return player? Can you move into the backfield and do some different things there? That all plays into it. And you go right down the depth chart, every single position, you're going to be asking those questions. What can this guy do for us? Can this guy play special teams? Can he do different things in that room? And it's a help on offense, it's a help on defense. Those are the questions that these players have to answer and make some tough decisions for the coaching staff and the front office.
So some injury updates. You see number 17 there a moment ago. Michael Walker was signed in the offseason, played last season with Jacksonville. He's back on the field, was dealing with a foot injury. Good seeing the tight ends get out in space here and the blocking drills here. You really, with the screens and the short passes we've seen in the first week or so of training camp practices, one of the elements that, isn't going to be, praised so much in the media, but is so integral to the success is going to be the blocking game. So seeing which of these guys, which of these receivers and tight ends step up in that regard could certainly help make some roster spots happen.
Well, we talk about it a lot over on the Journey to the Draft podcast about how when you look at changes around the NFL and schemes and things like that, and on all the new gadgets and the jet sweeps and the bubble screens, all those things where those quick hitting plays get the ball into Tyreek Hill's hands and Alvin Kamara's hands. You think of all the best playmakers in the NFL. Well, that means, number one, you need your receivers and your perimeter players to block more, and you need your corners, your defensive backs, to be able to be better tacklers. And I think that is absolutely the case in today's NFL. Maybe poo-pooed in the past, oh, that's not that important. We don't pay receivers to block. Well, if your receivers aren't blocking for these quick hitting plays, they're not going to be going too far. You need those guys to be able to block. And Travis Fulgham has looked really, really good in that role. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside has stood out at times at doing that. You mentioned Michael Walker when he was healthy. I thought he really stood out to me individually. So a lot of these guys really, again, it goes back to what do we talk about? The more you can do for the offense, the more you can do for the defense. And that's a huge, huge part of playing receiver in this offense.
We'd be remiss if we didn't wish, number one, Jalen Hurts a happy 23rd birthday. I don't think we need to break into song here. You don't want to hear that.
We don't want that.
No, we will spare you all that. But nonetheless, though, such a decorated college career, both at Alabama and at Oklahoma. Become a second-round pick last year of the Eagles. Started the Final Four games, extended action in 5 games overall, and did a lot of positive things down the stretch there behind, again, an offensive line that was changing on a week-to-week basis without some of the skill position players that the team imagined having around him. So we'll see how he steps up on this beautiful birthday. Now, how about this little drill right here as we're seeing the 2 starting outside cornerbacks, Darius Slay and the veteran addition of Steve Nelson. A great move by Howie Roseman and company to solidify the cornerback depth chart on the eve of training camp. Someone who brings a ton of starting experience and someone who has won a lot of football games, has only missed the playoffs once so far in his career. Steve Nelson coming over after a few seasons with the Steelers. But you look at that depth chart, and it's much stronger now with that veteran presence of Nelson in the mix. And going back to talking about McPherson earlier, Fran, you don't have to force his development which I think is just as important.
Exactly. You could take things slow with some of the younger guys, not even just McPherson, but some of the other younger corners. You don't need to force the issue there. It allows Avonte Maddox to stay in the slot, and you don't need to force the issue there with him moving outside. So that addition has been big, and he's had a good camp. A really feisty corner, a pesky corner. When you watch him on film, I've been watching for the last few years in Pittsburgh, previously in Kansas City. He loves just getting into the face of opposing receivers, and he's always in a position where he could reach into a guy's pocket and steal his wallet. That's the way that he lives each and every down. He is always going to be right up to the point where he could smell your breath. That's the kind of corner he is each and every day.
Don't quite know how to transition from that one, but I
gave you a couple outs there, and it's fine.
That's a good one. That's a good one. So, how do you think, based on what you've seen in practices, and you've done tons of film study on what Jonathan Gannon's background, where he's been at in the past, how do you think the cornerbacks will be utilized in this scheme? Going back to last season, Darius Slay was the big ticket free agent addition, or I should say traded from the Detroit Lions, but the big offseason addition. And it seemed like they were like, we're going to pretty much put him on an island. Let the defensive line feast, try to get to the quarterback, and hopefully they'll force the quarterback into mistakes that Slay or the other corners will be able to capitalize upon. And Slay, at his battles last season against week in and week out, it seemed like it was just getting better and better. The quality of receiver play he went against each week, had a career high in tackles, had an interception for the Eagles. But it'll be interesting to see what the new coaching staff will do with these cornerbacks.
Yeah, I'm excited about the new defensive scheme and just what that looks like. And we don't know. I'm really fired up to be able to see what they look. Look, during the preseason, my guess is it'll be pretty vanilla. We won't really get a sense until we get to week 1 and week 2. We get a sense of how these guys are being deployed. But look, at the end of the day, every defense has to play some kind of man coverage, and you're also going to have to play some kind of zone coverage. And to me, it comes down to, and you and I have talked about this, like whether it's the man coverage versus zone coverage, what are they playing on the back end? Is it going to be cover 4? Is it going to be cover 2? Is it going to be cover 3? Up front, is it 4-3 front or is it 3-4 front? I'm starting, because every defense wants to be multiple and every offense wants to be multiple. I'm getting away from those those nomenclatures of try and put labels on everything. To me, it's about the identity. What are the standards that you want to live by on offense? What are the standards you want to live by on defense? And Jonathan Gannon has talked through the hits principle. That's something you could take us through exactly what that means. But to me, when I watch the Colts defense, which he was obviously a part of last year as the defensive backs coach, and you watch the Vikings defense, you feel those defenses on film. When I watch college players, I could see a guy say he would fit that Colts defense. He flies around. He's fast. He's explosive. He's violent. That's, I think, more along the lines of where the game is, just the way that I'm viewing it. And same thing offensively. You look at it, you're like, all right, well, this is an offense that, if you want to call it West Coast, if you want to call it the spread or whatever you want to call it, it's all about finding ways to get playmakers the ball fast and let them do what they do best. And so, to me, it's all about identity as opposed to schematic.
What's interesting is you talk about the hits principle. So the H is for hustle, the I is for intensity, the T is for takeaways, and the S is for smart.
There we go.
Football IQ.
Did we talk about cover 2 or 3-4?
Nope.
No. It's all about what are the principles that you want to live by. That's the way that I've started to look at it on both sides of the ball.
The buzzword in recent years with defenses is versatility, multiplicity,
positionless football, all that stuff.
But it seems like coaches talk about it, but don't actually utilize that in the game. It seems like that Jonathan Gannon is truly going to run a multiple defense with the myriad of looks that we've seen in the first week or plus of training camp practices.
Yeah, and to me, again, that's why it's all about just what do you prioritize? Because everything can't be important, otherwise nothing's important, right? So you got to prioritize what's important. What are we going to drive home? Very clearly, what has been the ball security and creating turnovers, that is a point of emphasis, right? And you look at on both sides of the football, they've got their things that they want to highlight, and that's, I think, going to be the focus in year 1.
And on the flip side, as we look at the offense, it's been interesting to see, if you followed Sirianni's career as the Colts offensive coordinator, that they've had to meld and adjust that offense to different styles of quarterbacks.
Exactly.
So obviously you're working with Jalen Hurts, who's taken all the first team reps here to this point. In training camp, you want to take advantage of his unique skill set, not just being able to throw the ball, but run the ball. as well. And in fact, Greg Ward was asked about what he's seen out of Hurts. Now, remember, we've seen, Greg Ward has a quarterback background from college, so he brings that unique perspective to the table. But he said when it comes to Hurts, you haven't seen the full experience. The practice settings don't allow him to fully unleash all of his talent. Now, I don't know if we're going to get to see that in a preseason game.
Right.
We don't know what Coach Sirianni's approach to the preseason is going to be in terms of playing time and starters, and we're kind of in a new NFL world, so to speak. It's good to see the deep ball there to Wes Watkins, who has had a strong start to training camp after coming off a non-COVID illness that slowed him down the first few days. But very, very interesting to see what the approach is going to be, because it's a lot more emphasis, it seems, on these joint practices this year. That's why the Eagles have scheduled with 2 teams, and quite honestly, in all my years of covering the Eagles, you never saw that previously.
Yeah, and I think that there are a few benefits to that, right? Because it's a more controlled environment. Hey, the reason why preseason had been so important in the past was, well, we want to see these guys get some live reps in situational football. What's better than getting some? If you want to see how a quarterback operates on third down, or how an offensive lineman operates against an all-out pressure on a passing down, you go down the list of all the different situations. Then seeing it in the preseason, let the games play out and you get a sense of it. But when you get into these joint practices, you get that urgency, you get those live spirited reps, but in a controlled, you could do a whole period of 12 plays just on third down in the red zone. You could do a whole period of just blitz pickup and seeing the blitz defensively. And so you get those spirited reps going up against another team, but you get it in a controlled environment. And so there's plenty, and plus the other thing too, when you do it in a preseason game, all 32 teams get that film.
Yep.
When you have it from against just one other team, now only 2 teams have that film.
Certainly, and it's going to be important again as the Eagles try to find their way to the 53-player roster. You're watching little Routes on Air here as part of our exclusive training camp practice live stream presented by DraftKings. He's Fran Duffy. I'm Chris McPherson. Here it looks like we're transitioning drills here, so it looks like we're going to be doing the full picture view there. Field 1 at the NovaCare Complex, Lincoln Financial Field off in the distance. So in fact, that's going to do it for us here as part of our training camp coverage. Again, make sure to stay tuned later on after practice. Special teams coordinator Michael Clay will meet the media. We will carry that live. And then later on this evening, you can listen to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, as well as read our practice notes. And don't forget, number 17, Harold Carmichael, goes into the Hall of Fame. Live coverage on NFL Network kicks off at 6:30 p.m. tonight. And as you see Lincoln Financial Field off in the distance, make sure you're joining us there at 7 p.m. on Sunday. Tickets are still available. PhiladelphiaEagles.com/training camp. For Fran Duffy, I'm Chris McPherson. Have a beautiful Saturday, Eagles fans. Go Birds.